The rain battered the windows of the Bluebird Diner, each drop a tiny fist against the glass, as if the storm itself was desperate to break through. Inside, Ethan Cole sat alone in a corner booth, his fingers tracing the rim of a cold coffee mug, his heart pounding louder than the thunder outside. He was waiting for someone who might never show up, someone who could unravel his carefully guarded world with a single glance. Ethan was no stranger to hiding. Growing up in Willow Creek, a sleepy town in upstate New York where everyone knew your name and your secrets, he'd learned early to keep his truth buried deep. At 17, he'd realized he was gay, a revelation that felt like both a gift and a curse in a place where different was a dirty word. By 23, he'd mastered the art of blending in cropped dark hair, flannel shirts, a mechanic's job at his uncle's garage. But tonight, as the clock ticked past 8, he felt like a kid again, raw and exposed, waiting for Caleb Monroe. Caleb was the opposite of Ethan in every way that mattered. Where Ethan was quiet, Caleb was a spark blonde curls, bright blue eyes, and a laugh that could light up the darkest room. They'd met 3 months ago at a county fair, where Caleb, a traveling photographer, had set up a booth to sell his prints. Ethan had lingered too long over a photo of a lone tree against a sunset, and Caleb had teased him, saying, "You look like you're trying to solve that tree's life story." That was the moment Ethan's world tilted. Caleb's voice, soft and warm, had slipped past every defense Ethan had built. Now, as the diner's jukebox hummed a Dolly Parton tune, Ethan checked his phone for the 10th time. No messages. He'd texted Caleb an hour ago, "Meet me at the Bluebird. 8 p.m. Need to talk." It was a risk, asking Caleb to come back to Willow Creek after he'd left for his next gig in Albany. But Ethan couldn't shake the memory of their last night together's stolen kiss behind the fairgrounds. Caleb's hand brushing his cheek, whispering, "You're worth more than you know, Ethan." Those words had haunted him for weeks, pulling him toward a truth he wasn't sure he could face. The bell above the diner door jingled, and Ethan's breath caught. Caleb stood there, shaking rain from his jacket, his curls damp and sticking to his forehead. He scanned the room, and when his eyes met Ethan's, a slow smile spread across his face. It was the kind of smile that made Ethan feel seen, really seen for the first time in years. "You came," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper as Caleb slid into the booth. "Couldn't stay away," Caleb replied, his tone teasing but his eyes serious. "You sounded different in your text. Everything okay?" Ethan swallowed, his fingers tightening around the mug. "I don't know," he admitted. I can't stop thinking about you. And it's messing me up." Caleb leaned forward, his voice low. "Messing you up how?" Ethan glanced around the diner. Old Man Jenkins was at the counter, nursing a milkshake, and Sally the waitress was wiping down tables. But they were far enough away not to hear. Still, Ethan's chest tightened. "This town," he said, "it's not like Albany. People here, they talk. They judge. If they knew about me, about us." Caleb's hand twitched on the table, as if he wanted to reach out but stopped himself. "You're scared," he said softly. "I get it. But Ethan, you can't keep living for them. What do you want?" The question hit like a punch. What did he want? Ethan had spent so long burying his desires that the idea of claiming them felt like stepping off a cliff. "I want you," he said finally, the words spilling out before he could stop them. "But I don't know how to do this. Not here." Caleb's eyes softened. But before he could respond, the diner door swung open again. Ethan's heart sank as he recognized the figure his older brother, Nate. All broad shoulders and narrowed eyes. Nate's gaze locked onto Ethan and Caleb, and the air in the diner seemed to thicken. "Ethan," Nate called. His voice clipped as he approached. "Didn't know you were meeting someone." His eyes flicked to Caleb, sizing him up. Ethan's mouth went dry. "Just catching up," he managed. "Caleb's passing through." Nate raised an eyebrow, his stare lingering on Caleb's damp curls and easy smile. "Right," he said, the word heavy with suspicion. "Don't stay out too late. Uncle Mike needs you at the garage early tomorrow." As Nate turned to leave, Ethan felt a cold knot in his stomach. Nate had always been protective, but there was something else in his tone tonight, something that made Ethan wonder how much his brother suspected. Caleb reached across the table, his fingers brushing Ethan's wrist, a fleeting touch that sent warmth flooding through him. "We'll figure this out," Caleb whispered. "Together." But as Ethan looked into Caleb's eyes, he couldn't shake the feeling that together was a promise neither of them might be able to keep, not in Willow Creek, where secrets had a way of clawing their way to the surface. The next morning, Ethan woke to the smell of motor oil and the hum of a radio in his uncle's garage. His hands were stained with grease, his mind still tangled in the memory of Caleb's touch. Last night's conversation had left him raw, like a wound exposed to air, and Nate's interruption had only made it worse. He tightened a bolt on a pickup truck, trying to focus, but his thoughts kept drifting to Caleb. They'd talked until midnight, their voices low, weaving dreams of a life where they didn't have to hide. Caleb had spoken of city San Francisco, Seattle, places where love like theirs wasn't a scandal. But for Ethan, those places felt as distant as the stars. Willow Creek was all he'd ever known, and leaving meant abandoning his family, his job, everything that tethered him to safety. "Yo, Ethan." Nate's voice cut through the garage, sharp and impatient. He stood in the doorway, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "You gonna daydream all day or actually get that truck done?" Ethan wiped his hands on a rag, forcing a grin. "Almost done. Chill." Nate didn't smile back. "Heard you were at the Bluebird last night. With that photographer guy." Ethan's stomach twisted. "Yeah. So, people talk," Nate said, stepping closer. "Mrs. Larson saw you too. Said you looked cozy. You know how this town is. Ethan, you gotta be careful." Ethan's grip on the wrench tightened. "Careful about what?" he asked, his voice low, daring Nate to say it. Nate held his gaze for a long moment, then shook his head. "Just don't do anything stupid." He turned and walked away, leaving Ethan with a racing pulse and a sinking feeling that his secret was slipping out of his control. That evening, Ethan met Caleb at the edge of town, where the old mill sat abandoned by the river. It was their spot now, a place where the world couldn't intrude. Caleb was already there, leaning against a rusted beam, a camera slung around his neck. The setting sun painted his face in shades of gold, and Ethan's breath caught at the sight. "You okay?" Caleb asked, his voice gentle as he stepped closer. Ethan shook his head. "Nate's onto me. I don't know how much he knows, but it's bad. Caleb, if he tells anyone, he won't," Caleb said, his hand finding Ethan's. "He's your brother. He loves you." "You don't know him," Ethan said, pulling away. "He's not like you. He's got this idea of who I'm supposed to be. And this, he gestured between them. This ain't it. Caleb's jaw tightened, but his eyes stayed soft. Then let's leave, he said. Come with me to Albany. Start over. You don't have to stay here. Ethan. The words hung in the air, tempting and terrifying. Ethan wanted to say yes, to grab Caleb's hand and run. But the weight of Willow Creek pressed down on him, his mother's fragile health, his uncle's garage, the life he'd always known. I can't just leave, he said finally. Not yet. Caleb nodded, but the disappointment in his eyes cut deeper than any words could. They sat by the river, the silence heavy between them, until Caleb spoke again. When I was 18, I told my dad I was gay. He kicked me out. Haven't seen him since. But you know what? I found people who love me for me. You can too. Ethan. You just have to take the leap. Ethan's throat tightened. He wanted to believe Caleb, to trust that there was a world where he could be himself without fear. But as the river rushed past, he felt like he was drowning in the choice between love and loyalty. The following week, Ethan's world began to crack. It started with whispers, Mrs. Larson at the grocery store, her eyes darting away when Ethan passed. The guys at the garage, their laughter dying when he walked in. Willow Creek had always been a pressure cooker for gossip, but this felt different. Personal. He avoided Caleb for days. Not because he wanted to, but because every glance in public felt like a spotlight. Caleb's texts piled up, miss you. Call me. We need to talk. But Ethan couldn't bring himself to respond. The fear was a living thing now, clawing at his chest, telling him to pull back before it was too late. On Friday, Ethan's mother, Clara, called him to the kitchen. She was frail, her hands trembling as she stirred a pot of soup, but her eyes were sharp. You've been quiet lately, she said. Something on your mind? Ethan hesitated, his heart pounding. He'd always been close to his mother, but coming out to her felt like stepping into a minefield. Just work, he lied, forcing a smile. Busy at the garage. Clara's gaze lingered, and for a moment, Ethan thought she might press him. But she only nodded. You'd tell me if something was wrong, right? Yeah, Ethan said, the word tasting like ash. He left the kitchen, guilt gnawing at him. He wanted to tell her, to unburden himself, but the risk was too great. If she didn't understand, if she turned away like Nate, Mitha wasn't sure he could survive it. That night, unable to sleep, Ethan drove to the mill. Caleb was there, as if he'd known Ethan would come. The moonlight cast shadows across his face, and his voice was quiet but firm. You can't keep running from this, Ethan. From us. I'm not running, Ethan snapped, though he knew it wasn't true. I'm trying to protect what I have. And what do you have? Caleb asked, stepping closer. A life where you're afraid to be yourself. That's not living, Ethan. That's surviving. The words stung, but they were true. Ethan's eyes burned, and before he could stop himself, he closed the distance between them, kissing Caleb with a desperation he hadn't known he carried. For a moment, the world fell away. No Willow Creek. No Nate. No fear. Just Caleb's hands in his hair, his breath warm against Ethan's lips. But the moment shattered when headlights swept across the mill. Ethan pulled back, heart racing, as a truck pulled up. Nate stepped out, his face a mask of anger. What the hell is this? He demanded, his voice cutting through the night. Ethan froze, his mind blank. Caleb stepped forward, calm but defiant. It's none of your business, Nate. Like hell it isn't. Nate shot back, his eyes locked on Ethan. You're my brother. You think you can just do this? Here. Ethan's voice broke. Nate. Please. Save it. Nate spat, turning back to his truck. We're done here. As Nate drove off, Ethan felt the ground shift beneath him. Caleb reached for his hand, but Ethan pulled away, his chest heaving. I can't do this, he whispered. I can't lose him. Caleb's face fell, but he didn't argue. I'll be in Albany, he said softly. If you change your mind. Ethan watched him go, the weight of his choice crushing him. He'd chosen safety over love. But as he stood alone in the dark, he wondered if he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. The days after Nate's confrontation were a blur of silence and regret. Ethan threw himself into work, avoiding his brother's calls and his mother's worried glances. The garage became his refuge, the clank of tools a distraction from the ache in his chest. But no amount of oil changes could erase the memory of Caleb's hurt expression or the sound of Nate's truck peeling away. He hadn't texted Caleb since that night. Every time he opened his phone, his fingers hovered over the keyboard. But fear stopped him. What could he say? I'm sorry I'm a coward. I love you, but I'm too scared to fight for us. The words felt hollow, inadequate. One evening, as Ethan locked up the garage, he found a note taped to the door. It was in Caleb's handwriting. I'm leaving for Seattle tomorrow. Last chance. Meet me at the mill. 9 p.m. Ethan's heart lurched. Seattle. A world away from Willow Creek. From everything holding him back. But also a world where he'd be untethered. Alone. With no safety net. He drove home, the note burning a hole in his pocket. His mother was in the living room, watching an old movie, her frail frame wrapped in a blanket. Ethan, she said softly, sit with me. He sat, his mind racing. Clara reached for his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. I know you're hurting, she said, and I know you think you have to carry it alone. But you don't. Ethan's throat closed up. Mom, I saw you with that boy, she said, her voice steady. At the fair. Months ago. The way you looked at him, I've never seen you so alive. Ethan stared at her, stunned. You knew. I'm your mother, she said, a faint smile on her lips. I know my boy. And I know you're scared. But love. Real lovey, it's worth the risk. Her words broke something in Ethan. Tears spilled over, and he buried his face in his hands. Clara pulled him close, her arms a quiet strength. Go to him, she whispered. Don't let fear win. At 8:55, Ethan was at the mill, his heart pounding as he waited for Caleb. The river rushed in the dark, a reminder of time slipping away. When Caleb appeared, his face lit with cautious hope, Ethan didn't hesitate. He crossed the distance between them, pulling Caleb into a fierce embrace. I'm coming with you, Ethan said, his voice shaking. To Seattle. I don't know how, but I'm done hiding. Caleb's eyes glistened. You sure? Ethan nodded, his resolve hardening. Every time you whisper my name, the world pauses, and I finally feel worth loving. They kissed, the river their only witness. And for the first time, Ethan felt free. Leaving Willow Creek wasn't as simple as Ethan had hoped. The next morning, he faced Nate at the garage, the air thick with tension. Nate leaned against a workbench, his arms crossed, his jaw set. "You're really doing this?" he asked, his voice low. "Running off with that guy?" Ethan met his brother's gaze, steady despite the fear clawing at him. "I'm not running," he said. "I'm choosing to live." Nate's eyes narrowed. "You think you can just leave? Mom's sick. Ethan, the garage needs you. We're family." The words hit hard, but Ethan stood his ground. "I'm not abandoning anyone. I'll come back for Mom. Help however I can. But I can't stay here pretending to be someone I'm not." Nate looked away, his hands clenching into fists. "People will talk. You know that." "Let them," Ethan said, surprising himself with his own conviction. "I'm done caring what they think." Nate didn't respond, but the silence spoke volumes. Ethan left the garage, his heart heavy but resolute. He spent the day packing, his small apartment feeling both too big and too small. Every Itimo-worn jacket, a photo of him and Nate as kids felt like a tether to Willow Creek. But Caleb's note, still in his pocket, was a promise of something more. That evening, Ethan met Caleb at the bus station. Caleb's van was packed, his camera gear stowed in the back. "Ready?" Caleb asked, his smile both nervous and hopeful. Ethan nodded, climbing into the passenger seat. As they drove out of Willow Creek, the town's lights fading in the rearview mirror, Ethan felt a strange mix of grief and freedom. He was leaving behind everything he'd known. But for the first time, he was moving toward something real. The road to Seattle was long, and they stopped at a motel in Ohio on the third night. In the dim light of their room, Caleb traced the lines of Ethan's face, his touch gentle but electric. "You're brave," Caleb whispered. "Braver than you know." Ethan shook his head, his voice thick. "I'm terrified." Caleb smiled, pulling him close. "That's what makes it brave." They made love that night, slow and deliberate, each touch a promise to face the unknown together. As Ethan drifted to sleep in Caleb's arms, he realized that love wasn't just a feeling, it was a choice, one he was finally ready to make. Seattle was a shock to Ethan's system. The city buzzed with liferane-slicked streets, coffee shops on every corner, people who didn't care who you loved as long as you paid your tab. Caleb found them a tiny apartment above a bookstore, its walls lined with peeling paint but filled with possibility. Ethan got a job at a local garage, and Caleb sold his photos at weekend markets. For the first time, Ethan felt like he could breathe. But the past wasn't so easy to leave behind. Ethan called his mother every week, her voice a lifeline across the miles. She sounded weaker each time, and guilt gnawed at him for not being there. Nate hadn't spoken to him since he left, and the silence was a wound that wouldn't heal. One rainy afternoon, as Ethan and Caleb walked through Pike Place Market, Caleb stopped at a flower stall. He bought a single daisy and tucked it behind Ethan's ear, grinning. "You look like a poet." Ethan laughed, the sound foreign to his own ears. "I look like an idiot." "You look like mine," Caleb said, his voice soft but sure. Ethan's heart swelled, but the moment was cut short by a text from Nate. "Mom's in the hospital. You need to come back." The words hit like a freight train. Ethan showed Caleb the message, his hands shaking. "We'll go together," Caleb said without hesitation. "I'm not letting you face this alone." The flight back to New York was tense, Ethan's mind racing with worst-case scenarios. At the hospital, Clara was pale but stable, her heart condition flaring up, but manageable. She gripped Ethan's hand, her eyes bright with tears. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered, "for being you." Nate was there too, his expression unreadable. When Caleb stepped out to get coffee, Nate finally spoke. "You happy out there? With him?" Ethan nodded, bracing himself. "Yeah, I am." Nate looked away, his jaw tight. "I don't get it," he said finally. "But I don't want to lose you." It wasn't acceptance. Not fully. But it was a start. Ethan felt a flicker of hope. Fragile but real. Back in Seattle, Ethan and Caleb settled into a rhythm. They built a life together, late-night talks, shared meals, quiet moments where Caleb's laughter filled the apartment. Ethan started taking night classes, dreaming of a future beyond the garage. But the shadow of Willow Creek lingered, a reminder of the cost of his freedom. One evening, Caleb came home with a surprise, a photo he'd taken of Ethan at the market. The daisy still tucked behind his ear. "I'm entering this in a gallery show," Caleb said, his eyes sparkling. "It's called Worth Loving." Ethan stared at the photo, his own face unfamiliar, open, unguarded, happy. "You make me look better than I am," he said, his voice thick. Caleb shook his head. "I just show who you've always been." The gallery show was a success, and Ethan stood in the crowd, watching strangers admire Caleb's work. For the first time, he felt proud not just of Caleb, but of himself. He'd fought for this life, for this love, and it was worth every battle. But the past wasn't done with them. A letter arrived from Nate. Short and to the point. "I'm trying. Ethan. Come home for Christmas. Bring Caleb." Ethan read it over and over, his heart torn between hope and fear. "We'll go," Caleb said, reading the letter over Ethan's shoulder. "It's a chance to build something new." Ethan nodded, his fingers tracing Caleb's name on the page. He was still scared, but he was learning that love was stronger than fear. Christmas in Willow Creek was bittersweet. The town hadn't changed, same diner, same gossip, but Ethan had. He walked hand in hand with Caleb down Main Street, ignoring the stares, his heart pounding but steady. Clara welcomed them with open arms. Her health improved, her smile brighter than ever. Nate was quieter, but he helped Caleb carry their bags and sat with them at dinner, asking about Seattle. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. As the night wound down, Ethan and Caleb slipped out to the mill, their old spot. The river was frozen now, the stars sharp above them. "Thank you," Ethan said, his breath visible in the cold, "for not giving up on me." Caleb pulled him close, his voice a whisper against Ethan's ear. "Every time you say my name, it's like the world pauses. And I know I'm home." They stood there, wrapped in each other, the weight of their journey settling into something solid, something lasting. Ethan had lost pieces of his old life, but he'd gained something greater, the courage to love, to be seen, to live without shame. And as Caleb whispered his name one more time, Ethan knew he was finally worth loving, not just to Caleb, but to himself.